Our 2023 mid-season F1 driver ratings. Today, we are going to be getting into every single driver and their performances over the course of the entirety of the halfway point. We have made a list from P21 all the way to P1, which has accumulated all of our washed ratings up until this summer break. We're going to see how it's all shaked out. We average it all up, and I think we still got a good list on our hands, Tommy.
Indeed, yeah. Everyone has their own opinion, and it's going to be quite interesting, actually. We maybe don't have too much of a difference between our drive ratings, because if someone has a good race, we're going to give them a good grade, and if someone has a bad race, we're going to give them a bad grade. But those little 4s and 5s means that it's mixed the order. So we're going to see, we know that people love when me and you disagree and have different opinions. So I'm excited to see if our drive ratings are a bit different. And I've gone for Max P1 and you've put Nick de Vries in P1. We're about to find out if we've disagreed that much.
Right, let's start with P21. The position no one wants when there's 20 cars on the grid. My lowest mid-season F1 driver rating will come as no surprise. Nick de Vries with a whopping 3.3 out of 10. It kind of says everything it needs to say in what I've just said, because I think 3.3, when I look at it, I'm like, wow, that is absolutely savage. But then I can't think of many performances where de Vries genuinely made us sit up and take note. The only one is Williams, and that wasn't from this year.
Absolutely. So no surprise, my P21 is also Nick de Vries, and my grade is actually 3.7, so a little bit higher, but not a lot higher. Comfortably the worst driver of the season, and I guess that is reflected by the fact that he's lost his race seat. I know it sounds incredibly harsh to average, a 3 out of 10 during the season, but the reality is he had a shocker and was not only slow, but also seemed to have so many incidents as well.
We now go to P20. Logie Bear, I'm so sorry, 4.2 out of 10 average. I think that could come up in the second half of the year. I feel like he's been more impressive in recent times. He has been closer, but it's been very difficult to give him higher grades because of the fact that he is finishing 4, 5, 6 places behind Albon, and Alex is extracting everything out of that car.
Yeah, so P20, I also have Logan Sargent, P20, together again. 4.3 was my average grade. Yeah, just a little bit disappointing. He has had his moments where he's looked a bit better, but he's not a million miles off Albon. But I think, the excuse of him being a rookie, when you look at, Piastri's a rookie and look how well he's doing now, you get less and less of an excuse as the season goes on.
And he can eat there. There's a driver very close to him in
is.
both of our grades. And that is P19. Kevin Magnussen is 19th with also a 4.2 average grade. Now, Tommy, how have we worked out who finishes above who if they have the same average grade?
Higher highs, basically. Kind of best result from us, not in terms of finishing result, like a good score.
I feel as though he should be lower than Logan Sargent, actually. When I look at this, I feel over the course of the season, K-Mag has been less impressive as an experienced driver than Logan Sargent, who is a rookie and learning the ropes. So I will gladly put my hands up and say if I was to choose, I would swap those two now.
Yeah, he's been very disappointing. When Nico Hülkenberg's putting in some good performances, even in that tractor of a Haas, you kind of feel like Kevin Magnussen should be near Hülkenberg. I think a lot of people probably thought they're two solid midfield drivers that should be about the same, but I think Hülkenberg has comfortably beaten Magnussen, and Magnussen's just having a bit of a mare, so deservedly right down the order.
This is a paid partnership with BetterHelp. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world and is having a hard time, BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy accessible. And this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be hard. I know this as I've used therapy in the past, and having that right connection and feeling with your therapist is an incredibly important thing if you want to take steps forward in the problems that you're facing. Talking to someone is one of the most important things you can do for yourself. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easy because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a credentialed therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get a therapist. Just go to betterhelp.com/Matt and Tommy. Clicking the link not only helps support our channel, but you also get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. You can also easily switch to a new therapist with no extra cost. Most people spend hours in the gym or the treadmill every week. Why not give your mind the same attention? Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/Matt and Tommy. P18. Quite a large jump as well, actually. P18, I have Valtteri Bottas with a 5.1 average. It's been a topsy-turvy season for Bottas, sometimes picking up the pace and beating Zhou Guanyu, other times not. Very difficult as well. We do struggle with these Alfa Romeo and lower midfield to back-marker teams. Bottas, of course, had a great start to the year, but after that, it has fallen off a cliff. I don't know, there's just something that has kind of gone off the boil for Bottas. Obviously, going from Mercedes to Alfa, he's probably just enjoying the fact he's not got that pressure cooker of a team to be forcing results out of him every week. He's instead driving a rather washed tractor, and it's not really giving him the results he'd maybe want.
P18 for me is also Valtteri Bottas. I've given him not much more of generous, but very slightly 5.3. He is sadly down there, and Alfa Romeo haven't delivered. There was so much hype around the fact that they're going to be Audi soon, and this is where they need to start working their way up the grid. But the reality is they haven't. And yeah, Bottas, we've both graded him worse than Zhou Guanyu, who is the inexperienced driver at Alfa Romeo. So it's not good.
P17 now. Nico Hülkenberg I have got in P17 with a 5.3 overall rating. I want to apologise for some of my gradings that clearly have gone on over the course of this season, because I don't think it represents really how well Nico Hülkenberg is doing in that Haas. He has 9 points in the overall Drivers' Championship. He had obviously an amazing Austria. It's just difficult because then you mix that with a lot of very mediocre 15th places, 17th places, but he has had 2 kind of standout performances which should not sort of analysed at all, because in that car is an incredible performance. I feel as though 17th is harsh. I would probably thrust him up to about P14 if I could change it, but I can't. Look, sometimes we have washed opinions, but Nico, 5.3 for me.
Very small margins can bump people up quite a lot, to be fair. My P17 is Zhou Guanyu with a 5.4, so just 0.1 ahead of Bottas. He's had an all right season. He's shown good moments. And I think he's been solid alongside Bottas, who, should be doing better. His grade will have been hurt significantly by Hungary, which so could have easily been like a 9 out of 10 if he'd got off the start line and not done a bit of bowling. Yeah, 17th for Zhou.
P16 now, I have Zhou Guanyu. So 5.3 for Zhou Guanyu for me. Sort of echo your sentiments there, Tommy. It's weird. He's got 1 less point, and yet I feel he's been more impressive than Bottas, especially in the parts of their career that they're currently in. But again, it's just Alfa Romeo. It's really washed car, and I'd love to be able to see what Zhou Guanyu can really do, because I think he has got the potential to be a really solid driver.
Yeah, so P16 is actually Lance Stroll for me with a 5.7, so a bit of a jump up, but still not a very good grade for Lance. I'm not against him being that low down. He's in a very good car. Alonso's shown what it can do. Ocon had moments where he could beat Fernando. The odd race he'd be quicker, or he'd beat him in qualifying. There's been, for a lot of the season, it looked like Lance Stroll was a completely different skill level to Fernando Alonso, which some would argue he is, including me. It's not been good. He's so far behind Alonso in the championship. I think Alonso goes into summer break as the driver with the 4th biggest gap over their teammate.
In history, you probably
should
say.
In history.
We're now going to go to P15. This is where Lance Stroll features with a 5.4 overall rating. So again, I've been a little bit more harsh with my scoring, even though he is 1 above where you've put Lance. He's had a lower average score, but it's a shame that he hasn't been able to perform. It just seems like a running conversation we have about Stroll, where a few years ago, he's picking up a few podiums now and again, and we're thinking, okay, Stroll's actually decent. They're getting pole in Turkey, and it looked like at one point he was going to win the race and things like that. Whereas now, there's something that just isn't clicking for Lance, and it all comes back down to the conversation we've had previously about the motivation for Lance to genuinely get quicker, because he's the only driver really on the grid that has no worries whatsoever about losing his seat. If he wants it, it's his.
Lance Stroll is not a bad driver, but I think he's a solid midfield driver that comes into the sport for maybe 2 or 3 years and then loses their seat to someone else of a similar skill level, and that's it. But the reality is that Lance can't lose his seat, so you can perform like that is just having this massively long career and perhaps not motivation, like you say. My P15 is Nico Hulkenberg. He's got a 5.9 for me. A difficult one. I think Haas are definitely the hardest team to grade. I want to give him like a good grade because I think he shouldn't be punished for doing a really good qualifying and the car being terrible. But then there's the other bit in my head that's like, I can't give him a 9 for finishing 15th. So it's a difficult one. He's had a good season. He's had like some good moments. But yeah, P15.
If this was qualifying, he'd be up there in the top 6, wouldn't he? With all of his Q3 performances. But unfortunately, it's not that way inclined. P14 now. I have Daniel Ricciardo with a 5.5 average rating. His grades got hit quite hard, I think, after Spa. Otherwise, he'd probably be a little bit higher up. But for Danny Rick overall, I think 5.5 is actually not too far off what he deserves, really. It's a difficult one because he's just in there after 2 races. We'll see how it sort of filters out over the course of this second half of the season, but I'd like to see him do a bit better.
P14 for me is Pierre Gasly, who is the first driver in this list to make it into a 6, 6.0. Gasly's kind of been decent. He's been on a level with Ocon. We obviously both predicted that he'd be biggest flop, but certainly hasn't been the case. But equally at the same time, I don't think he's been particularly spectacular, minus a couple of great performances. I think 6 is fair. It's just sort of like, it's all right, it's good, not great.
P13 now, unlucky for some. Carlos Sainz is here for me with a 5.8 overall average grade. And I was just looking at all the drivers ahead in my gradings and going, seems very harsh for Carlos Sainz as a Ferrari driver that we have spoken about picking up his pace in comparison to Charles Leclerc. But on the flip side of that, we also have spoken a lot about him not actually converting that into a big result. Maybe would have him a couple of positions higher if I was to manually move him. But again, it's all close. It's within half a point average grade. And I think after Spa, I gave him a very harsh grade, but that's because I did genuinely feel that he was at fault for what happened with him and Piastri, more so than Oscar.
P13 for me is Esteban Ocon, 6.1. Whopping 0.1 of a higher than his teammate Gasly. I think Gasly's 6 has probably come from him getting a lot of 6s, and Ocon's has probably come from him getting a 10, and then in something like Monaco, and then getting a 0 for getting all the penalties in the world in the next race. He's got like a 1, then an 8, then a 5, then a 10, then a 5, then a 7. So here's a bit more all over the place, I guess.
Some standout performances from Ocon, but also some standout performances in the bad way. P12, I have Pierre Gasly at 6.2 overall rating, so jumped a little bit there, and actually higher than your overall rating of Gasly of 6.0. He's been good. He's been all right. Like, he's just joined Alpine. Did we expect him to beat Ocon? Neither of us said that we thought that would happen, but he's not been too far off the pace, and I guess recency bias in some ways will go, oh, well, Belgium, that was pretty awesome, wasn't it? He's been good. I think 6.2 sort of reflects that.
P12, I have gone for Carlos Sainz, which is a 6.3. He's been a bit up and down as well. Like, he's been consistent, and then finally now it feels like he's on that level with Leclerc. He's had some big mistakes, so I think his grade has come down. It almost feels like P12 is a bit harsh, but then I look at the drivers ahead of him and I'm like, no, actually, I think they have had a better season. So P12, 6.3.
Lovely. We now go to P11, just missing out on the points, and neither of us have Yuki Tsunoda here, which is quite funny. I've got Esteban Ocon, also with a 6.2, exactly the same grade as Gasly, and I think with that, Ocon has been slightly better, but then it comes back to the expectations of where we think Ocon should be in that Alpine team. Yeah, it's interesting how he's had some really standout performances, and I think that's what you want as a driver as well. I would much rather see a driver have some absolutely amazing performances where you're like 10, 9, but then also a few where you go, Jesus, how many penalties did you get there, Ocon? That's unfortunately a few races that he's had, but he's had some that genuinely people have probably sat up and taken note.
So my P11 is Oscar Piastri. With 6.3. It's very easy to get caught in recency bias and go, oh, Oscar Piastri is like the best driver of the season by a mile. Why is he not higher? And he's done a very good job. I don't think for a second, if it carries on the way it is, that Oscar Piastri is going to be P11 by the end of the year. But the way the average works out, he's had a good and solid start to his career. And it's now kind of the last few races where he's been getting really big grades that have bumped him up the order.
We move to P10, where my P10, 1 point scored, is Oscar Piastri with a 6.2 overall rating as well, the same as Ocon and Gasly. But as you say, if he keeps this up, if he keeps getting 9 and 10 grades like we gave him for Silverstone and for Hungary, I think it was, or maybe an 8, then of course he's going to thrust his way up the leaderboard. But I think 10th is genuinely a good spot for him to be in, and I wouldn't move him there anyway when you look at the season as a whole.
My P10 is Yuki Tsunoda with a 6.4. He's made a point. Yeah, Yuki Tsunoda's had a good season. I think he's had some really good performances that have made people sit up and go, oh, right, yeah, Yuki Tsunoda is a really good driver and maturing, but then also he's had those moments as well where we see a little bit of the old Yuki pop in once in a while and he has a bit of a disaster and picks up loads of penalties and things like that.
P9 now, and mine is Yuki Tsunoda with a 6.3 overall rating. And you look at the first 5 races of the season, 11th, 11th, 10th, 10th, 11th. You'd think that perhaps he deserved more than 2 points over the course of those first 5 races. Car's not been as good in recent times, which hasn't even allowed him to be able to stretch his legs, and also, as well as you say, a few mistakes here and there. But overall, I think he can be very happy. But he's getting that experience under his belt.
P9, and this is where the averages maybe play havoc a little bit, is Daniel Ricciardo with 6.5. Now, there'll be people, I'm sure, screenshotting the list and going, how on earth have you put Daniel Ricciardo P9? And the reality is he's done 2 races. Well, one of them I think was actually very impressive, that he came back. I think we gave him like an 8 or something. And then he had a bit of a washed race, an okay sprint, and I think I gave him like a 4 or 5. Yeah, it's P9 for Daniel Ricciardo, but we've done it for the sake of every driver and keeping it an average, and we can see what De Vries has done. But I think realistically, like, Daniel Ricciardo is impossible to really grade at this moment when he's only done 2 races.
P8 now, and I have Charles Leclerc, 6.6 overall grade. Now, I think this pretty much stifles any rumours, any thoughts of people thinking that I give Leclerc better grades than others purely because he called me babe. Now, that's not the case, clearly, because I have him in 8th this year, and I'm like, wow, is he the 8th best driver this year? Really? I would say this year there has been, of course, standout moments. The double pole in Baku was amazing. He's had 3 podiums this year. But has it been an amazing season for Charles? I would say no. He hasn't had that massive gap to Sainz like we've seen perhaps in the years gone by. It's not been a season that I've been shouting from the hills that Charles Leclerc's really outperforming the car. He has at times, but it hasn't been a consistent, run of form for Charles that would, propel him higher than some of the other drivers around him.
So in P8 for me is Sergio Perez with 6.5. Sergio Perez is one of those drivers that's had a very mixed season. I think a lot of people, if we were going on recency bias, would have probably put him way down the order. But, let's not forget he had a very good start to the season. And I think that's where, in my opinion, doing these average grades actually means that you lose a bit of that recency bias, because it would be very easy to forget that Sergio Perez won 2 races at the start of the season. Where his grade has plummeted down is particularly like Monaco, where me and you, I believe, gave him a 0. Very high highs and very low lows this year.
He certainly has. P7, I have Sergio Perez with a 6.9 overall grade, and he is very much saved by the first I'd say 4 of the first 5 races. He finished 2nd first, then he had a 5th, then it's a 1st and a 2nd. That was decent. That was the run of form. That's when we were all talking about, can he be a championship contender? And then since then, it's been 16th, 4th, 6th, 3rd, 6th, 3rd, and then eventually a second at Belgium, obviously. Overall, a 6.9. He has had good races. They feel like a long time ago. But yeah, Perez, P7 for me.
My P7 is George Russell with 6.8. I feel like George maybe hasn't been doing as good as I thought he would this year, and maybe like not average, but good as opposed to great like we saw last season. Spoiler alert, the next two drivers on my list have exactly the same grade as George, but he is the lower of the three because he's not had higher highs, and I think that sums up his season, where I feel like he's got good 6s and 7s and 8s. And his kind of season has been that season that we say a lot of Mercedes, where even when things are bad, they just bring in some points.
Fair enough. We now go to P6. And I have Alex Albon with a 7.0 overall average grade. Has been really good this year. Williams have taken a reasonably big step forward. And he delivers. I don't know. I still haven't figured out whether he flourishes in a team where there's no expectation of you, or whether he just went to Red Bull too early. But either or, we cannot commend enough how decent he's been. Is he ready for a place like Red Bull? I'm scared. I'm scared for him to go back to a place like that, but maybe a small step to a midfield to higher midfield team is where he deserves to go next.
P6 is Alex Albon for me as well, with a 6.8. He's a very difficult driver to judge. I do think he's having a very good season. He's had like those really impressive results where he's put a Williams where it shouldn't be, and I think that's why he's right up there in P6.
P5 now, I have Lando Norris, 7.1 overall rating. McLaren were terrible at the start of the year, which didn't help his grades, but obviously of recent times he's thrust himself up into the top 5, and I absolutely categorically believe that if McLaren have a good car for this second half of the year, he will perform almost every single race weekend, and he might well even thrust himself another position or two up if he can keep delivering podiums and top 5 finishes. So rosier times seem likely, and I hope, especially for McLaren fans, that happens.
P5, I have Charles Leclerc, who was the highest 6.8 of the three. Yeah, he's been good. Weirdly, with Leclerc this year, he's not been like unbelievable all the way through, and like you say, been like owning Sainz. He's had like those big grade performances where, Azerbaijan, where somehow he's put it on pole in both sessions and done all he can in a race against the Red Bull. I personally think that 4th to 8th, you can kind of chop and change all of them, really.
Would you move Charles Leclerc, though? Would you say he's the 5th best driver of the year?
I'd say it's maybe about right. If not, maybe I'd pop him a bit lower.
P4 now, I have George Russell with a 7.2 overall grade, which I'm surprised about. Mercedes always seem very inevitable in the way they score points, and I think I commend them quite a lot for that. I don't think George has been that great this year in comparison to Hamilton, but George has been able to still score very consistent points. If we look at the drivers' standings, he is P6, so he's scoring points. He's not doing too badly, but yeah, 7.2 overall.
My P4 is Lando Norris with a 7.1. Yeah, Lando started off obviously in that tractor of a McLaren, and now it's really good. But I think he has got grades at the start of the year where we were giving him good grades because he was putting that McLaren where it shouldn't be. And yeah, even though it's averages, and if we were picking, I would 100% pick Lando in P4 because I think he's stood out in this kind of midfield that we've found of our driver ratings, where there's a lot of close grades there.
P3 now on the podium. On the third step for me is Lewis Hamilton with a 7.6 overall grade. But Lewis has been, I think, very good this year. It's a shame that his car isn't at the level to challenge for wins, but he's still proving he's got the fire in his belly. He's still motivated. But Lewis has been very good, and I just long for him to have a car that will compete at the front consistently, because I feel like he's ready to take the fight to Red Bull and anyone else who fancies joining for 2024 when we have a 5-way fight for the championship. Thank you.
Yes, please. P3 for me is also Lewis Hamilton with a 7.8. This is quite the jump up from that midfield pack that I was talking about. For me, Hamilton has quite clearly been the third and top 3 driver this season. Hamilton's had a season that I think is maybe even a little underrated. Hamilton's comfortably been very consistent, great performances, and really, maybe it's gone a bit under the radar that Hamilton's having a a very good season. Maybe it's the fact that a good season for Hamilton is normally him winning 1,000 races.
P2 now, no surprises. Fernando Alonso with an 8.3 overall rating, 42 years old now, proving that if he has a car that's good enough, he can deliver to a almighty level. Himself at the start of the year was something to behold. He was picking up 9s and 10s left, right and centre. He was picking up podiums left, right and centre. And it's such a shame that they've gone off the boil slightly, because it was great to see him fighting at the front. Fernando, I can't say anything more apart from he has been unbelievable this year.
P2, yeah, Fernando Alonso for me as well. And exactly the same grade, an 8.3. Amazing consistency, to average more than an 8 throughout the whole season so far. Fernando's just been brilliant. He's one of those drivers that you always feel like Fernando will get the best out of a car. And if that car is 6th, it's because that car is 6th, not because he's had a bad race. He does feel like one of those drivers that can pull an unbelievable result when a car's not there. But when it has been there, and boy, has he been, the fact that he just went on that crazy run of podiums at the start of the season just shows that he's still got it. And what a season so far for Fernando.
And finally, P1. Drum roll, please. Let's see if we can guess who is going to be. It's Max Verstappen. I have given him a 9.6 overall grade. You just look at the results, and yes, wins everywhere, 2 second places. I'm speechless. I didn't think we'd see this. I hoped we didn't see this for the competition's sake, but Max Verstappen has been sensational. You cannot use any other word to describe Max Verstappen. His consistency is scary. It's relentless. We spoke about this before Red Bull had a car that could dominate. We both knew that this would be the case. If Max Verstappen was given a car that can deliver week after week, he will do that. He is a robot. He is emotionless. He will destroy Formula One, and he's doing it. He's on another level at the moment. I'm sick of people saying that it's just the car. It's not. He's showing this by how Perez is performing. It is not a guarantee that Red Bull is a car that can dominate. But he is showing in his hands he can.
P1 Max Verstappen for me as well. 9.7 out of 10 average is absolutely ridiculous during a season. Nothing summarises the thing we've said before about Max never having a day off. That is a 9.7 and a 9.6.
He's just a teacher's pet, isn't he?
Average.
He just wants
score.
a 10 all the time. He just
exactly.
wants 10s.
Could well put in the greatest season of Formula One we've ever seen. We've seen dominance in the past. We've seen cars that are maybe even more clear of the field than that Red Bull is now, or at least the same. And a driver hasn't won this many races in a row. They've had moments where maybe they have a bit of an off day in qualifying and then they only finish 5th in the race. And Max Verstappen doesn't do that. It's almost a miracle when he doesn't get a pole position, because we're like, oh my God.
Are you done? Are you done gloating? Well done. Verstappen fan. God, I wish I could say the same about Charles Leclerc, but here we are. Okay, well, that is it. That has been a long old mid-season driver ratings catch-up, I suppose. Will Nick de Vries thrust himself off 21st? Probably not, unless there is another miraculous twist in this silly season. And I look forward to seeing how this changes.
My brain's, honestly, I'm so tired. I'm done.
Right, I'm going to do an outro. Tommy literally needs to go to sleep. Thank you, everybody. Lots of love. We'll see you soon for another piece of content. Bye! You are washed.